Here we go. Hello and welcome to Freed Indeed Live. I'm your host, Kevin J.N. Hughes, and I'm joined yet again by Sako, Sako Gekchen. Um,
Yeah, you got it.
every so often I actually get. By the way, just so you know, the reason why I was saying Sako is because there is actually a public figure here in the United States who is like a right-wing commentator, and his name is Sako. But it's spelled the same way as your name. But
Oh,
it's Sako. So that's why I just sort of assumed that your name was Sako. So
okay.
I apologize for that,
No
but
worries.
yeah, but it made sense once you said like Sarkis, so of course it's Sako because why would your nickname be pronounced differently than the way it is in your
Yeah,
name?
yeah, yeah,
Anyway,
and in Eastern Orthodox, like lexicography or whatever, my name is Sergius.
oh, okay, Sergius.
Yeah,
Awesome. Well, why didn't you start with that? No, I'm just
yeah, Sarki is the Armenian way of saying Sergius.
Oh, cool. Okay, so your patron saint is Saint Sergius?
Um, it was a saint who was known as Saint Sergius the General. He had a son named Martyros, and both him and his son were martyred. He was a general in the Roman army.
Badass. All right.
Yeah.
Speaking of
All right then.
badasses, speaking of badasses, we're in chapter two of the Gita together, and
And we're about to see Prince Arjuna get roasted by God.
exactly. That's why. That's why I feel like that was a good segue because I feel like this is at least from where I've read so far, this is like the most badass section of of the Gita. Just this roast is just epic. But we'll get into that. So here we go. By the way, just as a reminder to people, I've already gotten some emails from you guys, and I appreciate your emails, but I just wanted to once again, clarify that as we're doing this, um, just because we want to read a text and accurately represent what it's saying doesn't mean that we agree with everything that it's saying. So if you're sending us an email or a comment that says something to the effect of, "Oh my goodness, the text you guys are reading is pagan," rah rah rah, um, we actually know that. Like we're not startled by your comment, and that's not
don't
really helpful.
don't take it up
Um,
with us. Take it up with Saint Basil.
Exactly. And that was kind of what I was gonna say is, one of the things that the Orthodox Church has been really good at over the years is being able to accurately represent its opponents and also um refute error while also speaking up that which is true. Like Sarkis just pointed out, Saint Basil the Great, one of the things that he was really famous for was being able to take the pagan mythology of the Roman Empire and accurately represent that mythology and accurately represent what was being presented while also exalting that which was true in it and using it to teach Christianity while still acknowledging the areas where there was falsehood. And St. Basil, rightly recognized the entities being called gods in these stories as demons, but still believed that the stories themselves had value. So, if you're coming and you're just like, "Oh, this is so bad," don't just I guess what I'm trying to say is let's represent each other in good faith, and have this discussion in good faith, not just attack things for the sake of attacking them. With all that said, let us get into our reading here. So this is chapter 2, Sankhya Yoga, or communion through knowledge. And as always, those of you who are from India or who speak Hindi, please forgive my butchering of everything in your language. I am sure your language is very beautiful, and I'm sure that it's
It
super
is.
cringe hearing me trying to say your language, but I
Although,
am doing my
although, uh,
best.
although a little bit of a clarification there. It's the common spoken language in India is Hindi, but this is Sanskrit, the
Oh,
ancient.
okay.
This is the ancient liturgical language.
Ah, okay. Got it.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's like oh,
So it's like Old Church Slavonic.
that's what I was thinking of, Old Church Slavonic. For us. Yeah, okay. That was what I was thinking of, but I couldn't remember what it was called, so I just kept thinking Church Russian, and that's not right. And then I knew that a bunch of Bulgarian dudes were gonna break down that door and beat me up for calling it Russian. Um, no, just playing. Okay. Sanjaya said, "To him who was thus overcome with pity, whose eyes were filled with tears, and who was despondent and bewildered, Sri Krishna spoke these words." And this is the roast we were talking about. The blessed Lord said, "Whence comes this unworthy weakness in a crisis, O Arjuna? It is unseemly for a noble person. It is disgraceful and obstructive to the attainment of heaven. Yield not to this unmanliness. Yield not to unmanliness, O Arjuna, for it does not become you. Cast off this base faintness of heart and arise, O scorcher of foes." So Sako, Sako, tell us what's going on here. What uh what is up with this this mic drop to start this chapter?
so he's so here Krishna is essentially giving Arjuna tough love, and the the English translation actually softens the language a little bit because um in the PDF I actually highlighted the Sanskrit word in yellow there. The Sanskrit word there is klebium, which is like it's often translated as unmanliness or whatever. It means like eunuchry or uniqueness. It carries the connotation of essentially being castrated, having your manhood cut off.
The note here in the commentary, it has a little note that says this is a snide reference to the last year of Arjuna's time in exile spent living as a kleba, which is a transsexual teaching and singing and dancing in the court of King Virata. So he's like mocking him and calling him a tranny.
Yeah, yeah,
Not gonna lie, freaking based.
yeah. And here's the thing, by the way. I used to because as I mentioned in a previous video, back for most of the time that I was a Hindu, I was relatively I wasn't insane. I was never in like the crazy ultra liberals with like the LGBT stuff, but I had like a very chill sort of let live and let live thing
Right.
when it comes to it. And I thought like okay, since Hinduism is a non-dogmatic religion, there's varying opinions on it, which is true. But my sort of thing was like okay, the at worst the literature the a lot of the Hindu literature is neutral. At so yeah, at worst it's neutral. At best it's like positive or like in some cases affirming of like gay people, whatever.
Right.
Um, yeah, um my Shaivite Brahmana friend sort of disabused me of this. It's definitely not as like straightforward and it's like as harsh in its condemnation as the Bible, but it does mock it. Like
Right.
in most cases, when there is some sort of homosexuality in a lot of the literature of ancient India, it's sort of the implication is that it's sort of humiliating to be in that position. Like Arjuna, who's sort of seen as like the uber masculine prince or whatever, has to hide out and pretend to be a woman for like a year, uh, and take the name Brihanala, and like he basically has to like in a sense like to a degree castrate himself, not literally, but like identity wise.
Right.
And so and here the text is sort of bringing that back. It's sort of a jab at him to essentially say like quit being a b word.
Right.
so so it definitely doesn't have like a positive connotation. That the most you could say is that maybe it's neutral, and in this context, it's negative because he's supposed to be tough and like masculine
Right.
and what needs to be done.
I just love
Okay.
it though. I'm not gonna
Yeah.
lie, like this just cracks me up. Not only so it cracks me up both like what it's saying, but it also cracks me up just from the perspective of like this is the way that bros encourage each other. Like I don't know if you've ever seen, but there was a cartoon a couple months ago that went viral or whatever, but it shows this guy. Well, first it shows this woman and it's like women doing affirmations and you see this woman and she's like working out and she's like got her headphones on and it says you are awesome, you can do anything, and then it's like men working at or men needing motivation
Yeah.
and you see in his earbuds, it's like, you're a little bitch. You need to. And so, and this
Yeah.
is like how bros interact with each other. Is just like, hey man, quit being gay and get your ass in gear. Like, I just
Yeah.
love it. Quit being castrated. Get your ass in gear, man.
there's
Just like,
there's a
it's such a bro moment. This is
yeah,
awesome.
yeah.
Um,
Look, I'm not about to sign off. I'm not about to sign off on bullying here because bullying isn't indeed toxic and like certain
right.
and especially in militaries and stuff, you know,
Yeah.
certain forms of hazing could induce people to commit suicide,
Right, of course.
So, but when you're among people who are your friends, there's something to be said for like a little bit of like mild bullying when it's people and like who have your best interest at heart.
Right.
Like you
Absolutely.
need the homies to kick your ass sometimes.
Exactly. Exactly. So, no, I completely agree. My wife used to hate when I would say stuff like that, and then one time she saw this TikTok and it was this woman whose outfit was just like really terrible. And she said, for the first time, I kind of understand what you're saying about how maybe sometimes there needs to be a little bit of bullying, because I feel like this woman could have benefited from some from some friendly, like good people bullying her a little bit to make her not wear this. Oh, it was so based. All
Yeah.
right,
All right. Yes.
let's get back. We can get
To
back to this.
it.
Okay, so verse 4, Arjuna said, O Krishna, destroyer of enemies, how can I fight with arrows in a battle against Bhishma and Drona, who are worthy of reverence? Um, is this the same Bhishma who is like in the Queen song, where he's like, no, I'm not gonna sing. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. That was just a bad joke. Okay. Um, I really gotta be careful. This is
Bhishma is his grandfather, and
got you.
Drona is his teacher. He's the one that taught uh, both him and his brothers and their evil cousins, like sort of the martial arts, like archery
Oh, okay.
and warfare when they were young.
And now he's fighting with the bad guys. So it's like, I can actually understand, like, just as an aside, I really understand Arjuna's plight because like it would be really difficult if I had to go to war and then like I look over on the battlefield and it's like all people, not just like relatives of mine, but like people who I'm really close to and who've been really influential in my life. Like that would be honestly really difficult. Um so this verse 4 actually really like strikes me. I know I was kind of making a dumb joke, but like this is actually really striking to me of like what he's going through. Conveys a lot with a little.
Especially because the people who are on fighting on the other side don't really want to like Bhishma and Drona don't really want to be there, and they know that they're fighting on the wrong side.
Oh, interesting.
I can't remember all the details, but there was like some sort of word or oath that was said without them sort of knowing the full implications, or like something
Got
happened that
you.
sort of locked them into uh, fighting for that other side. Otherwise, they would be like going back on their word, kind of thing.
Got you. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's even
so they don't. Bhishma and Drona don't even want to be there.
wow. That's like some ooh. That's some heavy hitting stuff right there.
Yeah, if they could, they would be fighting on Arjuna's side.
Wow. Ouch. Okay.
Yeah,
Verse
that,
5, it is better even to live on a beggar's fare in this world than to slay these most venerable teachers. If I should slay my teachers, even though they be degraded by desire for wealth, I would be enjoying only blood-stained pleasures. Wow. That is, this actually has a deep significance for me as a person who used to be part of, in a past video, we talked about my time in Calvinism, and, you'd be forgiven for thinking that I just hate Calvinism and that I think it's really stupid or whatever. But the truth is that actually, I studied Calvinism. I went to school with Calvinists. Many of my professors were Calvinistic Baptists, um, in seminary, and I was deeply formed by people who were of that more reformed bent that I've rejected. And so I feel like these verses here are even more heavy hitting for me because the truth is, every time I do videos against Calvinism or podcasts against Calvinism or get interviewed by someone and Calvinism comes up, I have to admit that there is always a part of me that really struggles with the love that I have to this day for these teachers who were so influential in my own life and in my own walk of faith who I I I do believe that they're wrong, very wrong. But and I fight against their false teachings. I fight against their errors. And in many ways, I realize that I am fighting against them, but still, like I have this deep respect for them, and so I do really truly understand. I empathize with Arjuna's plight here because this is like deep when we have to go against not not even just our families, but people who have trained us up
yeah,
and been influential in our lives. It's a deeply painful experience.
yeah. I feel it. I feel it to a degree even now with like our doing like these critiques on Hinduism.
Right. Yeah, I could see that. Verse 6, we do not know which of the two is better for us, our vanquishing them, the very sons of uh I'm sorry, you told me how to pronounce this before.
Oh yeah,
Dread, what is it?
Dhritarashtra. Dhritarashtra.
Dread Rashtra. The very sons of Dread Rashta, or their vanquishing us. After slaying them, we would not wish to live, even though they are standing in array against us. With my heart stricken, oh, sorry, I scrolled too far. With my heart stricken by the weakness of pity, with my mind perplexed about my duty, I request you to teach me conclusively what is good for me. I am your disciple. Instruct me, who have taken refuge in you. Even if I should win unchallenged sovereignty of a prosperous earth, or even the kingdom or lordship over the devas, I do not feel that it would dispel the grief that burns in my senses. Sanjaya said, having spoken thus to Sri Krishna, Arjuna the conqueror of sleep and the scorcher of foes said, I will not fight, and became silent. O king, to him who was thus grieving between the two armies, Sri Krishna spoke the following words, as if smiling. The Blessed said, You grieve for those who should not be grieved for, yet you speak words of apparent wisdom. The wise grieve neither for the dead nor for the living. There never was a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor any of these temporal kings, nor will there be any time in the future when all of us shall cease to be. So,
Here we reach. So here we arrive at our first Christian critique, which we
yeah,
don't need to spend as much time on since we already did a video on it. The pre-existence of the soul.
right.
Um, so we so we essentially, take the view as Christians that um sorry, we take the view that there was a time when um the souls of creatures did not exist. Uh because God is outside of time, um from his perspective, you could say that in a certain sense we've all sort of existed for him because things
Right.
aren't here for him. But from the perspective of linear time, what the Greeks would call chronos, yeah, we came into existence in our mother's womb. As the psalm says, you what was it like? Before I knew you, you formed me in my mother's womb. You shaped me. I can't remember off the top of my
Yeah,
head.
Psalm 1, you're thinking of Psalm 138, um, or Psalm 139 in the Hebrew if your Bible is uses the Masoretic text, but my Bible uses the Greek Septuagint. So Psalm 138 says, Lord, you test me and know me. You know my sitting down and my rising up. You understand my thoughts from afar, and you search out my path and my fortune. You foresee my portion, you foresee all my ways, for there is not a word on my tongue, but behold, O Lord, you know it altogether. The last and the first, you fashioned me and placed your hands on me. So notice that you fashioned me. Your knowledge has become too wonderful for me. It has become too overwhelming, and I am unable to grasp it. Where could I go to flee from your spirit or from your face? If I should ascend to heaven, you would be there. If I should descend to Hades, you would be there. If I take up my wings at the dawn and pitch my camp in the furthest part of the sea, even your hand would lead me and your right hand would hold me. And I said, perhaps darkness will cover me, but the night it will be light to my delight. For darkness shall not be dark because of you, and the night shall be as bright as the day. As its darkness, so also shall be the light. For you possess my heart. You took hold of me from my mother's womb. I will give thanks to you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works, and my soul knows this very well. My bone you formed in secret, and it was not hidden from you, and my substance was in the lowest parts of the earth. Your eyes saw me when I was yet unformed, and all men shall be written in your book. They shall be formed day by day, when as yet there was none among them. So So what Sako is referencing there is just it's revealing that there was a point in time where we began to be. We began to exist, and before that, we did not exist. Christianity rejects the idea of the pre-existence of the soul, and it also rejects the idea that there will be a cessation of existence. All people will live for all eternity, either in bliss or in torment, depending on the decisions they make in life.
Yes, and I'm not going to get into an extensive metaphysical sort of critique.
No, because
In
we
the,
already did that.
yeah, and then uh I'm working on a script for another video that we could do together in the future because I kind of sort of see the like the one that we did on the soul as sort of a part one,
Okay.
where we sort of really did a good job of articulating the Christian um, versus Hindu understanding of these things. But now for this for the second video on the topic, which we can make at some point, I'm working on like an active sort of Christian metaphysical critique of the Vedantic view of the soul, both the Advaitin, i.e., the non-dual, and the Vishishtadvaitin, uh, qualified non-dual, and then the Dvaitin dual thing. In each case, you have a sort of pre-existence of some kind, and
Right.
so I'm working on a extensive critique of pre-existence as such.
Awesome.
Uh, but for now, what I will say is that one thing that sort of separates creatures from God is that we are completely contingent. Now, from the Vishishtadvaitin view, which is the school that this translation of the Gita with its commentary represents, uh, souls are essentially eternal substances that are yes contingent on God for their being, but essentially are sort of like blank slate consciousnesses that have always been
Right.
in a non-linear sense. And so my main issue, one sort of critique that I'll just sort of leave here for now, so we don't dwell too much on it, is that I would ask, like, if our experiences in this life, right, our relationships with people, our names, our occupations, whatever, like all these things that Vedantins would call I making and my making, are illusory, right? But in the case of Vishishtadvaita, which I'm critiquing here in particular, that does acknowledge the reality of individual souls, right? What would make these souls individual? They would essentially be like carbon copies of each other,
Right.
because if my identity, my name, my experiences, the only thing you could say to sort of defend the individuality of souls, as opposed to them just sort of being carbon copies, like billions of or even infinite carbon copies of each other, is that um, in some sense you would have to say that after they've become liberated, after they sort of transcended the like their personal individual attributes that make up their sort of temporary identity, you would have to say that the soul bears the memories of all those lives, and then
Right.
after liberation, at least then what you would have sort of separating one soul from another is their unique trajectory of lives they've lived, and those memories sort of at least separate one from another. But if those are not preserved in some way, then essentially, yeah, you have just an infinite number of um like white orbs, like
Right.
putting it in. So yeah, I'm not gonna get too deep into it, but that's sort of my first critique. But yeah, let's move on.
And I'd be remiss if I didn't state that I do have um, two separate videos critiquing the idea of the transmigration of the soul, or what's generally called in the West reincarnation. I have two podcast discussions on that. One uses the wonderful works of Seraphim of Platina to critique the idea. He was actually himself I can't remember if he ever spent time in Hinduism. I remember, I'm pretty sure he says that he did. Um, but anyway, but he came out of all of that. He was definitely into the New Age before he became Orthodox. But anyway, so I use his writings in one of my discussions, and then one of them is my own, just my critique of it. So you can go see both of those at some point.
Mm.
Or you can pause this video and go see those if you want to see that. And then, like Sako said, he's working on another one that we're gonna do. So,
Yeah.
okay. So we won't get any further into that because, like you
Yeah.
said, we've covered it. So verse 13. Just as the embodied self passes through childhood, youth, and old age pertaining to the body, so at death it passes to another body. A wise man is not confused thereby. The contact of the senses with the objects, O Arjuna, gave rise to the feelings of cold and heat, pleasure and pain. They come and go, they are impermanent. Endure them, O Arjuna. I'll just say that this, even though he's coming at it from a very different place than we would, this is actually something that Christianity would agree with Hinduism about. Like, again, we get there from a very different perspective, but Philippians 4 says something that I think would resonate with our Hindu listeners, and I'll explain why it's a little bit different, but
Yeah.
Philippians 4 says, starting in verse 10, "But I rejoiced in the Lord greatly. Now at last your care for me has flourished again, though you surely did care, but you lacked opportunity. Not that I speak in regard to need, for I have learned in whatever state I am to be content. I know how to be abased and I know how to abound. Everywhere and in all things I have learned both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." So we see that in both Christianity and Hinduism, or at least in both Christian scripture
Mm.
and Hindu scripture, we have this concept of being content no matter what our sort of sensory experience is. St. Paul actually wrote that, what I just read, he actually wrote that from a prison cell, and not like a modern, cushy, American prison cell where you get a toilet and a bed and get to work out twice a day or whatever. No, like this is a Roman prison where your hands and feet are in stocks and you're just sort of stuck in one position, sometimes soiling yourself, really horrible conditions, and yet he can say, "I'm content in all things." So I think that the person who wrote this, I don't know, who is the author of the Gita? Do you know?
Um, yeah, so tradi traditionally it is the whole thing is attributed to a sage by the name of Vyasa.
Vyasa.
And it's actually interesting because Vyasa himself is said to have lived during the time when the events of the Gita
Oh,
were said to have taken place. Interestingly, um, so he's
cool.
actually in the story. He makes frequent appearances.
Oh, wow.
He sort of
Okay.
cameos. Um, if this was indeed written by him, he sort of cameos himself into his own narrative.
That's
Um,
awesome.
but the truth is we don't know with
Okay.
absolute certainty. It's one of those things where um, because again, sort of similar to like what we were saying with the Bible, right? I was saying like with the Bible we have more concrete historic indicators. In
Right.
addition to linguistics, right? So you could sort of like read a Greek text, and then you could compare the Greek grammar, structure, etc., to other Greek texts, and you could be like, okay, so this is sort of contemporaneous, or fits into what we'd call like late antique Greek, as opposed to like
Right.
archaic or like classical Greek. Um, and so, but in addition to that, you have like the text in the Bible that'll mention certain kings, certain empires, and
Right.
like you can sort of roughly date Moses to about like the 12th or 13th century BC, uh, during the rule of King Ramesses the Great of Egypt.
Right.
You can you can pretty much unambiguously date Jesus to the rules of Augustus and Tiberius.
Right.
But with a lot of Hindu texts, linguistics is, for the most part, all scholars have to work with. That plus some possible vague mentions of other schools. So, like,
Right.
there are some indicators, like if the text mentions the Samkhya school but not Buddhists at all, or either directly or indirectly, scholars can sort of like, at least to some with some degree of confidence, deduce that okay, this text is pre-Buddhist.
Right.
Um, so yeah, so it's really hard to say. But out of pure charity, I'll say yeah, why not? It could have been Vyasa.
Okay. So Vyasa would be proud of like the way that Saint Paul and Vyasa would agree that part of our goal should be to be content in whatever our circumstances are.
Yeah,
And now they get there from different ways because, as we can see, Sri Krishna here is saying like the reason you can be content with whatever happens is because it's all sort of illusory. It's all happening to this sort of self that's kind of an ambiguous concept and
it's just like transcendent essence that
right,
it's like
exactly,
it's like all these things that are happening to you, whether it's like you're getting beat up or you're hot or you're thirsty, you're cold, whatever. It's all happening to your body. It's all
right.
happening to your sort of temporary
Right, it's not happening to the real you, so to speak. Whereas Saint Paul, he's like, no, it is happening to the real you, but in Christ you have power to through Jesus, you have the power to see God working in these things and to actually rejoice even in the midst of suffering because um you see how God is moving in your life through these things. So it's kind of a difference that I'm highlighting, but it's also there's a similarity and a difference to this. There's a Venn diagram here, in how we would approach this subject.
yeah.
So verse
And
15, one who is affected by these, O chief of men, and to whom pain and pleasure are the same, that steadfast person is alone worthy of, that steadfast person alone is worthy of immortality. The unreal can never come into being, the real never ceases to be. The conclusion about these two is discerned by the seers of truth. Know that to be indestructible, by which all things, the material universe, is pervaded, none can cause the destruction of that, the immutable. These bodies of the Jiva, the embodied self, are said to have an end, while the Jiva itself is eternal, indestructible, and incomprehensible. Therefore, fight, O Bharata, Arjuna. One who deems the self a slayer and thinks of it as slain, both are ignorant, for neither slays nor is slain. So I'll pause here just to ask, like, as I'm reading this, it seems to me like this kind of logic could really be used to justify some pretty messed up behaviors. So,
Yeah.
like, what would be the Hindu argument for why, like, being a serial killer is wrong? I'm asking you, uh, Sarkis, what would be kind of the Hindu argument for why, like, it would be wrong to be a serial killer and just kill a whole bunch of people? Um, why is that wrong if the person who's a slayer and the person who's slain, none of that is really happening anyway, and you should just do what you're gonna do.
Well, yeah, we have to take the passage in its proper context
Right.
if we're being charitable. So
Of
so
course.
here so here Arjun here in this text, Krishna is telling this to Arjuna in the context of like I don't want to kill my parents, right?
Right.
Or sorry, not parents. I don't want to kill my my teachers, grandfather, whatever, like uncles, what have you. And and Krishna is saying like, well, you're not really killing them. So he's not saying, hey, because the soul is transcendent, the body is ultimately like a construct and all these things, that it's okay to just kill willy nilly. That's adharma. That's unrighteousness.
Right.
He's saying in this context, if what you're concerned about is killing slash hurting those you love, you're not really going to be killing slash hurting them in the ultimate sense because they will simply like you might even meet them in a next life or something. Like you're like basically it's like he's saying you can't kill anyone, only God can. So it's almost like from a God perspective, right? He's basically saying like if you think you can kill people, uh, that you're even capable of doing that, you got another thing coming. Like, and you sort of see this sort of expounded on later, like I'm God, only I do that. And the sort of climactic sort of thing is that he says is in reality, it I'm like we'll get to it later on when we get to that chapter, but he's saying I am the one who has passed judgment on them. From my perspective, they're already as good as dead.
Right.
Although not really dead because they're not going to cease to exist, but like in this life, they're as good as dead. It's your choice if you want to be the instrument of my judgment, basically.
Okay.
Um, so the reason why you shouldn't kill is, well, a, it's morally wrong uh for a similar reason for why to why it's morally wrong for us Christians. Um, we would say you're committing a crime against a fellow image bearer of God. A Hindu would say the same thing, but because it's more sort of panentheistic, they would say you're you're committing a crime against a fellow manifestation or localized instance of God. So
Right.
it's still sacrilege. In the same way, they would say like why you have a duty to sort of help the less fortunate because when you treat them right, that is an act of reverence towards God. When you mistreat them, it's an act of sacrilege.
Okay. And
And,
so
and
I
also
I
and
yeah, go
also, even
ahead.
though it's not permanent, I would like to remind everyone that Hinduism does have hell. It's called Naraka, and
Right.
it's every bit as nasty as anything you would read in Dante's Inferno or um like I would encourage everyone um to sort of read some of the Hindu and Buddhist texts that talk about the different hells. It is some scary stuff.
Right. No, I do see that, and I do want to be charitable. That's why I figured there was an explanation, but it does seem to me like this argument could be. I realize that there's a proper context
Mm.
and that it's not saying this, but there does seem to be like if your argument is, you know, you as you have this duty to do this, and wink wink, you're not really killing anybody anyway because it's actually nothing can happen apart from the will of God. Like there does seem to be a sense in which someone of nefarious mind could use that to say,
Mhm.
well, then isn't it also true that if I kill somebody, then I'm not really killing them and I can just do what I want?
Right, and there is truth to that critique. So that's another thing I was going to say, that even though it's not saying that, like it's not saying like, oh, you know go ahead and like it's okay to take a life, because you're just sort of sending a soul off to a next life or whatever. Like, even though that's not what it's saying, and killing is a serious, mortal offense in Hinduism, some of the edge of that is taken off by the fact that that there's this belief in reincarnation. Whereas from a Judeo-Christian perspective, I would argue, so I sort of gave the charity. Now here's my critique. I would argue that some of the edge of the severity of that sin is taken off because of reincarnation, whereas in a Judeo-Christian context, uh, it's because you only have this one earthly life. Another aspect of the earthly life for humans is their chance for repentance, right?
Right.
So if you kill someone, not only would you potentially be not only would you be like killing their body, like sort of killing them in the bodily sense, you
Right.
could potentially be jeopardizing their very soul, because this life is the time we have to repent. Now, God being merciful as He is, could have mercy on whoever He has mercy, and the intercession of the saints is powerful, etc., etc. But when it comes to our personal repentance, this life is all we have.
Right.
So let's say somebody let's say somebody killed somebody who was, like, you have a drug dealer who um, killed a druggie or something, right?
Right.
Um, he essentially deprived that person of all those years he would have had to potentially um, repent of his fallen lifestyle and come back into communion with God, so that when he did die, naturally, God willing, um, he would be in a state of grace with God. So that's another reason why, from a Judeo-Christian perspective, we would argue that killing is even more serious.
Right.
Whereas
Okay.
whereas like from a Hindu perspective, as horrifying and as abysmal as Naraka can be, there is an eventual end to it.
Right.
So I feel like the lack of permanence takes the edge off of that admonition to respect life.
Exactly. I also feel like to a certain extent, like I have the same sort of problem with this, and you can correct me by the way if what I'm saying is
Mm-hmm.
maybe a not very charitable take and unhelpful, you can tell me because I do want to be charitable, but it seems to me that like one issue that I have with this kind of thing is the same sort of thing I have with people in some denominations who believe in once saved always saved, and it's like um there so a common critique that I see of that sort of once saved always saved thing is, okay, so Adolf Hitler, let's say that he had, a moment of true faith when he was a little kid, said the sinner's prayer, I guess in German, or whatever. And so he's quote unquote saved, but then he goes on to do all of these horrible atrocities, and then he ends up going to heaven anyway because he got saved at some point. That really seems messed up. Like, that does
Yeah,
not seem just in any kind of
Yes,
meaningful sense. Although, like you said, like God has the right to show mercy on whom he wills, and I get that, but at the same time, like it's very difficult. It would be very difficult for me to say that like Hitler gets to be unrepentant and go to heaven after murdering all these
and yet
people.
somehow those he committed genocide against are sent to hell because of
Right. Right, exactly. But
they
then
didn't.
I see a similar issue here because it's like if reincarnation is true, then okay, yeah, Hitler did some really terrible stuff, but at the end of the day, none of this is real anyway. A, and B, he's just going to be reincarnated over and over again until he gets it right, so to speak. So it's
Yeah.
not like it really mattered. Like, for all we know, Hitler has already lived, you know, four different saintly lives between World War II and today. So, like, I don't know. It just, you get what I'm saying, right? Like, it feels
Yeah, no,
really
I
bizarre
absolutely do,
and,
and
and
I agree.
problematic.
The only the only one that would sort of come close to that, to our way of thinking on these things in the, like, from a Vedantin perspective, would be Madhava, who is the founder of the Dvaita Vedanta school, the dualistic school, because in his school of thought there is eternal damnation, but he has his own slew of problems, which I'll bring up later.
Okay. That makes sense. So, yeah. So I have to admit for my Hindu listeners that, like I said, and like I said, there are schools of thought, people who profess to be Christians, who believe things that I think create the same sort of moral problem. But again, this is part of the reason why I'm an Orthodox Christian and why I believe the apostolic faith, and I don't follow those heresies. And I'm just sort of encouraging you to think through these things and to come out of these things for yourself. Or feel free to post in the comments how why you feel that what I'm saying doesn't really refute. And I'm happy to interact with you
Absolutely.
guys. Like I am not trying to just lob bombs or whatever. I'm genuinely
Yeah.
desiring interaction here. So, yeah. Okay, verse 21. If one knows this self to be indestructible, unborn, unchanging, and hence eternal, how and whom, O Arjuna, does he cause to be killed, and whom does one kill? As a person casts off worn-out garments and puts on others that are new, so does the embodied self cast off its worn-out body and enter into others that are new. Weapons do not cut the jiva. Fire does not burn it. Water does not wet it, and wind does not dry it. It cannot be cut, it cannot be burnt, it cannot be wetted, it cannot be dried. It is eternal, all-pervading, stable, immovable, and primeval. This jiva is said to be unmanifest, inconceivable, and unchanging. Therefore, knowing it thus, it does not befit you to grieve. Or, if you consider the self to be repeatedly born and repeatedly dying, even then, O Mahabahu, which means mighty armed one, it does not become you to feel grief. For death is indeed certain for everything that is born, and rebirth is certain for that which has died. Therefore, you should not grieve what is unavoidable. O Arjuna, all beings in the universe have a beginning that is unknown, a known middle, and an unknown end. Why should there be anguish in relation to any of them? One regards this self as a wonder. Likewise, another speaks of it as a wonder. Still another hears of it as a wonder. And even after hearing of it, one knows not. The jiva in all bodies, O Arjuna, is eternal and indestructible, and therefore it is not profitable for you to feel grief, or excuse me, it is not proper for you to feel grief for any being. Furthermore, considering your own duty, it does not befit you to falter, because to a kshatriya there is no greater merit than a righteous war. So, again, I just want to I I don't want to really like hammer this point over and over again, but I'm just saying that this whole section gives me that same pause. I have that same
Yeah,
thought about all of these things. Um, and then
yeah, I do.
also, yeah, go ahead.
I do as well. I was just gonna say, although, sort of a little bit of a fun fact. I'm not sure exactly when this became like a tradition, but
Yeah,
like a couple of those passages from the Gita there, the self cannot be cut, burned, etc., etc. It is eternal, such and
yeah.
such. Yeah, it's sort of become a tradition to sort of say that as like a prayer or affirmation after someone has died among Hindus. So
Yeah.
it's sort of become like sort of a funerary benediction.
And that makes sense. Like I can see how it would be. Although I was gonna say that this verse 31, or wait, not verse 31, sorry.
Mhm.
Verse 30. This is another thing that one thing I really appreciate about Orthodox Christianity as opposed to a lot of other things I've experienced is that in Orthodox Christianity there is an affirmation of grief that I think is very wholesome.
Yeah,
One of the problems I have with a lot of nominal Christianity is actually this idea that like you shouldn't grieve. Like your relatives, they've died, they're either in heaven or hell. You shouldn't grieve. Like you should just be happy. You should just and we even sort of have in our modern American sort of pseudo liturgical life, we've replaced the funeral with the quote unquote celebration of life. So like even when your relatives have just died, you're still not allowed to grieve them. You have to celebrate their life instead. And I find this deeply troubling, deeply problematic, because
yeah.
part of the human condition is grief. Part of what, and this gets at another thing that I kind of feel maybe, so
Or
in
or,
Christianity,
or hold that thought real
yeah,
quick.
yeah, go ahead.
Or when modern society does affirm grief, they sort of like really make it like, I guess, clinically psychologize it.
Yeah,
like we're if you need to go see, if you need to go talk to someone, if you need to go, you know there if you need to go work through the however many stages of grief and
right,
like it sort of even then it sort of becomes like, okay, let's jump on this before it becomes a problem. Let us know if you're not okay, so we can sort of talk you through it so that you're okay again.
right.
And 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 yeah, like you were saying, like there, it's okay to not be okay sometimes.
Exactly. Exactly. Grief is actually, and the reason why, you know, we have that perspective is because we have an acknowledgement that part of Christian teaching is that God did not actually create the world to include death and suffering and all these things. Um,
Yeah,
these things resulted from our fall into sin. And I realize that that's something that is not true in Hinduism. In Hinduism, this is all part of the cycle of creation and destruction. But for us, death is a foreign invader. For us, this is something that was not meant to exist in the world. And Jesus Christ has actually conquered death and destroyed it and liberated us from it. And this is actually when we celebrate Pascha, the greatest festival of the Christian year is our celebration of the fact that death has been overcome. It's a defeated foe. And so we do have this sense that when an Orthodox Christian dies, there is a sense that we can rejoice in the fact that that this person gets to partake of that victory over death. But there's also a sense in which we grieve this unnatural state of affairs by which we have been severed from connection with this person. We've been severed from them in many ways, and that is something to grieve. That we have lost something, and it's not just natural, but it's actually good for the human heart to grieve that because it reminds us
Mhm.
of what we've lost in paradise, that we
Yeah.
lost that our sin has cost us that paradise and that life unending. But it's also a reminder that Jesus Christ has conquered, that he has taken the victory, and that there is a day coming when we will get to experience eternal life with him, and when there will be no death, there will be no more suffering, there will be no more pain, and there will be no more tears. And we rejoice looking forward to that day. Um, and this is a very important aspect of Orthodox Christianity. Um, with that said, Sarkis, I have to get going pretty soon here. We've covered
Okay.
about half of this chapter, I think, but we'll pick up on verse 32 next time. But did you have any closing remarks you wanted to make before we close out this particular session?
Um, yeah, I would say that one area where we do have common ground um, is that both of us sort of both Hindus and Christians seek a sort of liberation from the grasp of death. From different perspectives. From a Hindu perspective, it's sort of transcending the illusory nature of the body with its like impermanent flesh and all its attributes, and sort of knowing oneself as the Atma, or self, and like its transcendent, indestructible nature. And from their perspective, when you do that, death has no more power over you, because all you realize that all that's going to die is this physical body, sort of. So whereas from a Christian perspective, the Christ for us is the, as Kevin explained, the conqueror of death, the one who plundered the devil, and the one who has raised and will raise the dead from their tombs on the last day. Um, we both at least have this intuition, this understanding that death, at least in the physical sense, is not the end. But where we in the coming chapters, I'm hoping that we can sort of explain where the Orthodox faith has a more um, like a more consistent and coherent answer to this question of death.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys very much for watching. Thank you so much, Sako, for joining me and helping me through this presentation. And please do share this with your friends so that they too can be freed indeed. God bless.